Well, what I was naming is that we as a group agreed that instead of doing a question or engaging in that way, what I'd love for us to do is engage with one of the writings of one of the artists or one of the authors and who we're speaking with. So last week we did a June Jordan poem. I do have an Audre Lorde poem here, but before I even get into it or try to read it, I would love to open up to the group, right? I know we're all fans of the women who have comprised the sisterhood, and I would just love to hear from you if you're willing to unmute yourself. Who is someone who you're excited about rereading again, or you feel proud of having known their work, given that we're exploring this book, right? Like, who's someone that's coming to mind? I would love to hear from folks if they're willing to give it a second and think about it. Sonia, yeah, feel free. Feel free to unmute yourselves too. Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
A writer that has greatly influenced me is that I admired her work greatly is Toni K. who wrote the short story collection "Grill My Love." The Seabirds Are Still Alive. I hope one day that it gets reprinted. The Seabirds Are Still Alive, but she's one that chronicled the African American spirit experience within communities that often get that get marginalized or overlooked. And she wrote a lot about the youth, young children. And those children get written off or get dismissed oftentimes because they come off a certain way because of whatever challenges they may be facing at home. But one of the stories I appreciate by her is The Lesson. And
Mm.
she's done a lot more, but she's one that influenced me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And thank you for not only citing those amazing works by Toni K. Kambara, but also naming those specific works, right? Like the lesson. I think we all, that may be what I read next week. So thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. Feel free to unmute yourselves.
Hi, my name is Jomene. This is my first time joining the virtual session, and
Yeah.
um, someone that I'm so excited. I have not read any of her works yet, but Michelle Wallace. When I had read that chapter about her publishing Black Macho in the Myth of the Superwoman, it was the reactions that really like stood out to me because as a like Black woman fiber artist, I was always apprehensive about like publicizing my work for whether that's fear of like my work getting copied and me not getting credit for it or just people straight up saying that I got no business talking about what I'm talking about. And I don't know, just like reading that like she went through the same things and like hearing about how those like reactions evolved over time and even seeing, living during a time where this was in the past, it was just very eye opening for me. So I really want to read the passage for myself.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I feel like Michelle Wallace is one of the writers who are maybe not people maybe as familiar with. So it's really great that you've highlighted that. And yeah, that chapter was insane. And I hope we get to talk about it. Yeah, anyone else? All right, well, if not, I'll just spin through this Audre Lorde poem real quick. It's very quick, it's very short. Um, if I can find it. Sorry. Oh, here we go. Coping by Audre Lorde. It has rained for 5 days. Running. The world is a round puddle of sunless water where small islands are only beginning to cope. A young boy in my garden is bailing out water from his flower patch. When I ask him why, he tells me young seeds that have not seen sun forget and drown easily. That's Coping by Audre Lorde. I'll put the name of the poem unless in case you want to revisit it later. Um, and with that being said, let's get into it. Courtney, hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you again so much for joining us. I think you can see our enthusiasm is up. It's so great to have you here in community with us. I would love if you could maybe just want to give a very maybe short bio and share if there's anything interesting that connects you to the Bronx with us as a group. Yeah, and then we can just like sort of get into questions from the group. So as soon as Courtney is done, folks, feel free to raise your hands, unmute yourself. Let's get into the discussion.
Okay, first and foremost, thank you, Ron, Paula, and all of y'all for reading and engaging my work. It takes a long time to write a book like this, and it's done in isolation in archives, and it's awesome to connect with readers, and it just means so much to me that y'all are engaging in this work. Um, so I am an English professor at the University of Oregon. I'm a specialist in African American literature. I teach the waterfront from the beginnings to the present. And my own research is primarily about contemporary Black women writers, and contemporary in the sense of roughly post-civil rights movement to the present, although sometimes I reach further back than that. Um, I My undergraduate degree is a dual degree in English and African American Studies from the University of Virginia, where I studied under the great Reginald Butler, and I did my graduate work in New York at Columbia. And I've done my teaching and studying has all been on the East Coast until I moved all the way out here to Oregon to start this gig almost 16 years ago now. And I was the first full-time professor of African American literature they'd had in over 5 years. Um, what Paula is not so subtly referring to is that I mentioned of anything I've done connected to this book. This one's really special to me, and it's the one my mother is most proud of because she is from the Bronx. So it really, she was so pleased that this is happening, and it's always good to make mom proud. Um, I'm I know y'all looked at a few specific chapters, 4 through 7 for today, but I'm happy to chat, answer questions, talk about anything y'all want to discuss related to what of the book you've read so far. And I also must say that the two of you who mentioned what you've been reading, I'm teaching a Black women's short stories course starting in January. And so I am combing through all my Toni Cade Bambara short stories, deciding just which one's going to make the cut. So, Sonia, I take the hint. And everyone should read more Michelle Wallace all the time. She's one of our most brilliant and important cultural critics uh, during the era of the Sisterhood and now. So yeah, what do y'all want to talk about? What's on your minds?
Any questions or any sort of excerpts that come to mind? Yes, hello, Lenore.
Um, is there some special section of the book that you would particularly like to share with us?
That's a great question. Thank you, Lenore. It's always good to know what the writer wants to know or wants to share.
I would be happy to. I did not prepare a specific, um, I didn't prepare a specific passage for you, but let me think about it for a minute and I would take a suggestion if
Okay.
somebody has a favorite passage.
Yeah,
I
no
do,
problem.
I do
Oh,
have
yeah.
a question. I'm sorry, go ahead. Diomina. I'm sorry. I know
It's still a
I
minute. It's okay.
thank you.
Um, my question is like, what type of feelings and experiences came up for you while you were working on this book?
Oh, so many. Um, So, as I said, I am a literary scholar, a specialist in African American literature. I'm not a historian or a journalist or an oral historian. I first saw the photo of the sisterhood that's on the cover of my book. I first saw this in 2004, and I couldn't believe there was not already a book about this group, right? I just felt like there was one that needed to be written. So, feeling called it was one of the feelings. feeling anxious about whether I was the person to write this book at various phases, and feeling frankly intimidated by the kind of archival work involved.
Mhm.
Because the archives of Black women writers tend to be spread out, often undervalued, right? So, for even the correspondence that I quote in here, or the records of meetings and groups and events, someone has to know that they matter, preserve them, and then make sure they get somewhere where someone can access them. So,
Mm.
on one end of the spectrum, you have Sisterhood member Toni Morrison, whose papers are at Princeton, very carefully archived and cared for in fancy rooms where you have to wash your hands and put on gloves to handle them. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have Verta Mae Grosvenor, who her archives were never housed anywhere, and she lost most of her belongings and all of her papers to floods and hurricanes. So there's a kind of sense of overwhelm or intimidation on that front. But as Toni K. Bambara would say, the only way to do it is to do it. So, there was the pursuing it on that front. Nervousness about particular skills. I realized that I needed to interview those members of the sisterhood who were willing to talk. And I interviewed and corresponded with former members, both on and off the record. But as I say, I'm not an oral historian. I'm not a journalist. So I had to like call up my journalist friends and say, so if you do an interview over the phone or in person, how do you record it? Do you use your phone? There's a big learning curve there for me. So I got really lucky in that the first sisterhood member whom I interviewed for this project was Margot Jefferson, who herself is a brilliant writer of, two experimental memoirs that everyone should read, and cultural criticism, book reviews, and also interviews. So she kind of taught me how to do it while I was doing it. She had come to Oregon for an event, and she and I just sat over a long, leisurely breakfast, and I asked her questions. And sometimes she would say, well, also, you should ask me about this, you know. So some sense of just overcoming those obstacles. And then I would say many moments where I felt moved or inspired. Um, there's in reading letters among sisterhood members during the period of the late 70s and far beyond, so many offerings of support. And something you can't see in the pages of this book is sometimes it's just a beautiful handwritten card, Patricia Spears Jones to Audre Lorde, I know you're going through it. Just sort of saying how, right. So moved in those ways. Um, and I would say inspired and obligated to keep keeping on in a time when I think it's fair to say that higher education is under attack and that humanities and the liberal arts are under attack. And so I have had a career as a literary scholar in a period when we're just trying to do more with less year over year. And seeing the things that the women of the sisterhood did, regardless of much bigger obstacles than any that I face, like June Jordan's Poetry for the People project at Berkeley, right? So being kind of inspired as a teacher, and as a person trying to work in an institution while also doing meaningful literary study. Does that get at it, some of what you're asking? I mean, there's so many feelings in this book.
Yeah, I also have a follow-up. Like, in these experiences and interacting with these women, how did you maintain your own positionality while writing this book?
Um, how did I make? I think that there's a couple different pieces there, right? So there's the piece where I am a straight white woman, and that's different than the members of the sisterhood. There's the piece where I am a scholar and a teacher, which is different than a poet or a novelist, or a playwright, which many of the women was interacting with are. Um, but I know what my lane is. My lane is not about giving voice to anybody, right? These women all have voice. They spoke, they write, they speak for themselves. This is not about giving voice to someone who's been silenced. My lane is about helping as many people as possible read, reread, and better understand as many books by Black people as they can in their lifetime. That's what I'm doing as a teacher and a writer and a scholar. So it's really neat to sort of start out with what works by Sisterhood members y'all were thinking about or inspired to read or recommending in the chat or in the conversation, because really that's just my purpose, is to inspire reading, rereading, and more deeply understanding works by Black writers.
I also want to say you did that amazingly.
Thank you. Thank you. Hmm.
Thank
I
you. Yeah.
me if this question has already been answered because I had to step away for a few minutes. What motivated you to write this book?
Thanks for that. Thanks for that question. So there's so many ways to come at that. Um, it's first to say that my first book, which grew out of the dissertation I wrote in graduate school, my first book is called Women's Work, and it's a study of Black women's novels in the 80s and 90s. As many of you probably know and think about, um, Black women writers, especially novelists, enjoyed a period of increased visibility, let's say, in the 70s and 80s and 90s. And I always say visibility, not boom, because Black women were writing since before this country was a nation. It's not as though suddenly in the 70s there were Black women writers all of a sudden. And so in my first book, Women's Work, writing about the uses of cultural nationalism in novels by Paul Marshall, Toni Cade Bambara, Ntozake Shange, Gloria Naylor, and Toni Morrison, I really came to understand that something had made that moment of increased visibility happen, and I didn't really know what it was. And so that's when I started digging more into or trying to understand collaborations that had happened from the late 60s into the early 80s among Black women writers, thinkers, editors, teachers that made this period of increased visibility for Black women writers possible. So partly it was just trying to understand how the literature I studied happened. And it is really partly that I first saw the photo of the Sisterhood in 2004 in Evelyn White's biography of Alice Walker. And that was before Alice Walker's archive was open to researchers. So Evelyn White had access to that archive and had seen the photo, but I'd never seen it before. And my beloved friend and mentor, Farrah Griffin, said, "Come here, Courtney, there's this picture you got to see." And so I see this photo of the Sisterhood in 1977. I didn't recognize everybody at first. Certainly, like I could have told you off the bat that it was Toni Morrison and Alice Walker. I probably recognized Ntozake Shange right away, but it would be later that I would recognize Verta Mae Grosvenor on site, or June Jordan, or Nana Maynard, or Audrey Ballard, right? It would take me a while to learn those other names. I did know enough to know that it was no accident that those women would be in a room together. And then I started to see the photo circulate all over social media and referred to as an informal gathering of Black women writers in the 1970s. And I just did not believe that this was just an informal gathering. I mean, I knew enough to know that how busy Toni Morrison was by 1977, and that she was already in the era where she would say, when people say, "How do you do it?" She would say, "Well, I don't give dinner parties," which I like to think back and fall back on that when I need to. So I was asking around, and I would say to people, "Well, I saw this photo labeled the Sisterhood. What do you know?" And another stellar, important, irreplaceable mentor, Cheryl Wall, was the one who said to me, "Hey, Courtney, aren't you doing something in the Sisterhood? I think I saw something in June Jordan's papers that's labeled the Sisterhood." And when I was able to see what was in that folder in June Jordan's archives at Harvard Radcliffe, there was an agenda and meeting minutes. And that confirmed for me this was something way more serious and organized. And there needed to be a book about it. Um, and so then I spent a long time writing it. I mean, and a thing Cheryl Wall also told me was this is not the kind of book you can write until you have tenure because it's going to take you so long to do it and you're going to have to go around to a lot of different archives. The research is going to be extensive. So this is not a first book. And she was right about that, as with so many things. Darlene, does that answer what you're asking?
I'm sorry. Yes, it does. Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Sonia.
We love the works by these writers. So I'm wondering, how have the white women responded to your invitation that they read more of African American writers?
Which white women?
Your introduction encourages white women to read
Yeah.
these writers. Have you had any responses or reactions by women to your invitation?
I don't know that I've had anybody speak directly to me in response about the introduction of my book. I've been teaching in undergraduate classrooms for over 20 years, and I teach almost only African American literature. I teach a Morrison seminar, teach lots of Black women writers. And what I can say is white women's responses have varied widely over time and dependent on location. So, because I'd done all my studying and teaching and living on the East Coast prior to coming to Oregon, there were different dynamics. So, like when I came out here, I this was much more predominantly white, right? So I'd been in other predominantly white institutions, but this was a much more white institution. So I've seen everything from thank you so much for introducing me to June Jordan's poetry. It's become really important to me to, well, what do you mean white feminism? That there had elements of racism in it or didn't include Black women. Like a lot of white women feel very confronted by that idea. So I've had everything from, you know, women really in white women having like angry tears about being confronted about the racism of the women's movement to a kind of embrace. And I will also say with younger people, with the traditional college age students, so students 18 to 22, I would say 10 years ago, it wasn't necessarily obvious to them that, and this is students across race, ethnicity, gender, it wasn't necessarily obvious to them that literature matters for liberation. Whereas more 2020 to 2025, I see students understand reading poetry, fiction, nonfiction by Black American writers as part of the work of liberation or the source of humor or inspiration to sustain them for political action. So they seem to care more about books in the role of their kind of political thought and action than maybe they did 10 years ago. It's a mixed bag, you know.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Yes.
Yes. Yes, I have a comment and a question. I just want to say thank you, Dr. Thorson, for writing your book. I attended the Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival, so I attended your panel there, and that's how I learned about your book. So I'm really appreciative of your scholarship and the work you do in teaching African American literature. So my question is, based on your scholarship and your current book, are there literacy or cultural and or activist strategies from the sisterhood that inform your teaching practice?
Mhm. Um, Definitely. So I love that Paula started us with a grounding practice, and a grounding moment. Um, and I think that that's a feminist practice. I think that's a typical Black feminist practice. I know that that's, at even at in the Sikh program in the 60s. I know that's the kind of thing that women of the sisterhood did. So I'm trying to learn as a teacher. Like as a teacher, you can probably tell this right off the bat. I'm in love with every text I assign. I think every text I assign is important and beautiful, and I think it's worth students' time, and I'm very serious about it, and I want to get right to it. So I'm trying to teach myself that they need those same kind of grounding moments, and to give us a minute to like stretch, breathe, or inhabit our bodies, particularly after we read pieces that involve violence, that involve sexual violence, that involve racist violence, within while also kind of being accessible to all different physical abilities. I try to think about what we can do in the classroom. And sometimes we just have to take a moment to all like take a deep breath together. So that's one. Um, in terms of what else I bring, other things that I bring into classroom or teaching practice that I learned from the sisterhood. Um, there's a specific assignment that some of them, Adrienne Rich, not a Black poet, but collaborator and co-conspirator with these women, an assignment that many of them used when they were in Seek, and thank you for that link, that they used when they were in Seek was to have students create a table of contents for an anthology. So I teach on the quarter system. It's a 10-week term, the full-on anthology assignment. And you can read about this in Danica Savanik's book, Open Admissions, about the CUNY open admissions movement. She writes about this. So I can't quite accommodate the whole anthology assignment that these students use. But what I like to do is, and we've just done this because the fall term just ended here, is we do bring in a text of your choice and justify why it should be on the syllabus next time I teach this class. And so I just finished a 100 level course on poetry of Black liberation, first year, first term students. And they all have, so then they all have to think about what do they think poetry of Black liberation means, right? Like they have to go through that selection process. They bring in a poem, they read it aloud to their colleagues, they tell everybody why they should go read that poem, they tell me why it should be on the syllabus next time. We did the same thing for my upper division seminar, Black feminist literature. So could be a cross genre. Students do that. And I actually had them work in small groups, defend their choice to each other, and then they have to choose one amongst themselves and tell the whole class. So there's a couple things going on there. It's about always ceding authority to students while knowing that I am the repository of expertise. So those are some of the kind of pedagogical practices I think about. I think that Bambara was incredibly spirited and funny as a teacher. I can only aspire. I'm never gonna never gonna get there. I can only aspire. Um, and I think that Patricia Spears Jones as a teacher, as a writer, and as y'all will see when you hang out with her coming up, um, is laid back and casual in a way that belies the sophistication of every thought she's having. And I would aspire to that as a teacher. So, those are some of the things. And also, I would say that in terms of pedagogy, reading about members of the sisterhood, studying their correspondence with each other, and interviewing them reminds me how important it is to have friends to complain to about tough teaching days.
Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, and I definitely see that need to, or what you're aspiring to as a sense of authenticity, right? Like really being able to show up, be in joy, and be yourself.
Yeah.
to the work around teaching. And yeah, we all need community, right? Like we all need friends. So that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. I just want to make sure Saida gets a chance. I know that hand has been,
Oh,
that virtual
yeah.
hand been up, baby. And then afterward, it's Layla.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. So I missed the first like meeting or what have you, but I read the book sometime last year and been beaming since I saw it on Instagram to join this, and then happened to be here the night of with the author. So don't mind my beam. I can't control it.
What's up?
I
But
love it. Don't control it.
Beam us up.
and
Beam us up.
I've loved Toni Morrison since I was a very young girl before I even understood what she was writing. These were the books that my mother was giving to me to read. So my question is I guess more broad in terms of like the sisterhood when I read it, it it reminded me of the that community, right? Having literally a group of people who are in different parts of a profession or a chosen area, and they are constantly supporting one another. And it's not a I, me, it's us. It's us. It's I have this platform. I want to help you get to the next, and I'm gonna push to get you in essence, and push to get you here, and push to
Mm-hmm.
get you, this exposure. Do you think, what role do you think that the sisterhood, even after it dissolved, continued to play in the expansion of both black women writers and black feminist writers?
Mm-hmm.
And has there been a decline, or has it continued to increase over time, right? Because I know
Yeah.
that at some point it dissolved, and it's like, well, what happened? What happened after that? What happened
Right.
to the genre, the women of this era who were influenced by these women? What happened? So
Yeah.
that's my very broad, rambling question. Sorry.
Thank you so much for that. And let me do the best I can. First, I mean, when Toni Morrison says the function of freedom is to free somebody else to a bunch of graduating Barnard students in the late 80s, that's almost 10 years after the sisterhood has ended, right? So the ethos that you're talking about of using one specific platform, skill set, ability and access to bring in or bring up more Black women writers continues long for all of these women, continues long after the sisterhood stops meeting regularly and formally. Um, we want to be really clear that sisterhood members, including Patricia Spears Jones, like Margot Jefferson, um, are still active as writers. And I would say Patricia Spears Jones is an example of someone who really didn't receive the recognition that her poetry deserved until at least the 90s. I think she gets the Jackson Poetry Prize in 95. So there's that. Um, I which in other words to say is like some of these women are still active. There are members, there were over 30 women who attended at least one or more meetings of the sisterhood. There are women who are members of the sisterhood who are still teaching 5 and 7 courses as adjuncts in universities, in the broader New York area right now. Um, there and went on to do this work in all kinds of places. So uh Zita Allen, major figure, member of the Sisterhood, major figure in dance journalism, wrote for Dance Magazine, and has been pursuing and may have completed by now, but while I was working on this book, was completing her PhD at Temple in dance studies, right? So the women of this group and still, right? And then I don't know the answer to every branch. But I know that you all read for today that chapter about Morrison, where what I'm trying to do is say, yes, Toni Morrison's work is important and meaningful and beautiful and should be studied and taught. And also, its prominence rose out of the collaboration among Black women to get Black women writers published, publicity, reviewed, and taught in classrooms. Um, so even when I hear you say, Saita, that you are a longtime reader of Toni Morrison, and that maybe now you will read and think about her in this networked context, like that is a fruit of this labor, right? I don't know what that looks like everywhere it reaches. And I'm a teacher, not an activist, and I'm clear and sort of know that difference, right? But I have students who, I mean, some of my proudest moments are I have students who are in school, parents, like former students who are now parents on school boards all over rural Oregon, who write me emails about the arguments they're making to teach books by women in this book, in high schools, like in rural Oregon, right? So, I mean, that's one way I know it's working. Um, but when I take the line from Jordan's poem, A Certain Profusion of Unidentified Roses, that's what I mean. And part of it is we cannot see the workings, right? So we can see the Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival, 50th anniversary, that was mentioned. We can see Torch Literary Arts Organization for Black Women. I encourage people to check out if you don't already know about Torch. We can see that work. But people couldn't see the sisterhood when they were meeting on the third Sunday of every month for over 2 years. So we also cannot see everything that's going on, right? It's not just for public consumption. It's often private collaboration. So that's some of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Layla?
Oh, unmute, Layla.
Oh, I'm sorry, Layla, you're muted. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
So, the preface to the question, how long did it take you to write this whole entire book?
It came out 19 years after I first started thinking about it. So I saw the photo in 2004, and the hardcover was first published in late 2023. I would say the work I worked on it in a more concentrated way for about the last 7 years, from about 2016 to 2023, so about 7 years.
Are there pieces of the book or things that you wanted to include that you weren't able to put in?
Um, Well, I'm sure can see that there are ways that I'll use quotations from primary texts, like from poetry or novels, to kind of advance the narrative. And I take the absolute paragon for that to be Alexis DeVoe in Warrior Poet, her biography of Audre Lorde, where she uses excerpts of Lorde's poetry to advance the narrative. I mean, in my perfect world, I would have quoted and done more close analysis of more primary text because that's actually like what I do most of the time. And because I want to give readers even more of the texture of these women's work. So that's what I would have done even more of, I think.
I just wanted to say that the chapters that I read thus far has given me such an insight. I felt like a fly on the wall, and I felt like
Good.
you were like in those meetings with them, and you were kind of, because just the way you talked about these situations and just the poetry that you inserted in certain areas as well, just to kind of echo what some of us get wrapped up in. Like, we don't have the time or the commitment to pick up the phone like we used to. We don't. And
Right.
now that we do have electronic devices, we still don't like really pick up the phone anymore. So I just love the fact that you made me feel like a fly on the wall. And I was like, wow, this is very interesting. It just made me look at some of these. And I was a undergrad in Black Studies as well, so that's SUNY New Paltz. But I was just like in awe that I never like knew about some of this stuff that was really happening around the time that I was going to school. So I really like those things, and I kind of wanted to ask like the question specifically of how long did it take you, and just really like, was there something else that you wanted to include? Because I think sometimes as a writer, you always want to continue to write, and I know you're an
Yeah.
educator by trade, but I was just asking those, and I wanted to pay you that compliment. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that, Layla. I mean, and there's two things I'd say. For whatever moments made you feel like a fly on the wall at a meeting, the gratitude we owe is to Renita Weems, Reverend Dr. Renita Weems, now one of our most accomplished womanist theologians, to the art historian Judith Wilson, and to the poet Patricia Spears Jones, because the three of them were younger members of the group, and I sought to interview those three women specifically because they were put in the role of correspondence secretary or were tasked with taking the minutes because they were kind of earlier in the start in their careers or had recently come to New York. And to my mind, I adore Alice Walker. I think she's very important. There are many published interviews with Alice Walker that one could read, but those women who had done that kind of day-to-day work to record what was happening, write those agendas, write those minutes, send out those letters being like, people need to start showing up to meetings. You missed 2 meetings, whatever. Those are the people, those are the women who talked with me to give me that fly on the wall information. So it's down to Reverend Dr. Renita Weems, Dr. Judith Wilson, and Patricia Spears Jones, any of that feeling that we get to have that we're observers. It's down to their work.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of your questions so far. Before we move forward with Darlene and Ron, I also just did want to mention, because this stood out to me, and I'm like, I don't know if I'll get a chance to say it. The entire section on Morrison is so enlightening because being that she is one of the most well-known writers within this collective, having the breakdown of sort of like this sort of racist exceptionalism that she was experiencing, I believe is the term you used, and sort of bringing that into the zeitgeist. It's not a question. I just want to like highlight it and say that I really enjoyed reading that portion and thinking a little bit about, because then I then went and read Kachka's profile on Toni Morrison, which I
Yeah.
haven't read, and it is so like adorning and almost. I mean, while he emphasizes her greatness, it almost is unrealistic the way that he writes and sort of projects this idea of exceptionalism on her. I don't think any writer really writes something in order to gain that sort of praise. So it was just such a great contrast given like what you gave us in the book. So you don't have to respond, but I just want to like thank you for that part.
Thank you for that. I just will respond to say that because of the important place that Morrison occupies for so many of us, but also more
Yeah,
broadly for the culture, that chapter that was the scariest one to put out there.
I can
Espe-
imagine.
I mean, people seem to have mostly had really good responses, but that's the one I've been most afraid about how
Well,
how people would respond.
I'm so happy that you've responded, you've named this because as I was reading it, I did wonder like this is brave. This is a brave notion for not only a white woman to come and name this, help us redefine the lens of community through the way these Black feminist women writers understood community, but you also, at some point in this, I think what's most interesting about that chapter is that it's like toward the end of 150, maybe 153. I didn't write the page down. I just wrote down the quote. Um, but you wrote like critics who write about Morrison as suspicious of Black women's collectivity erase the role of networks in fostering her deserved prominence. They only negate the work of Morrison. They only negate the work Morrison did to foster the success of other Black writers and to help secure African American literature as a distinct field of study.
Mhm.
I just thought that was really insightful to then all of us who are book lovers and whether we're academics or we just love words, it's these same distinctions that help us define literature. So I just thought it was really powerful to read about how do we honor and love Toni Morrison for what she is as opposed to like what we project onto this idea of being the only one or being one of the few.
Yeah.
It's so important.
And we lose so much, you
Yeah,
know. I always joke that it's like the Highlander theory of African American literature. There can be only
yeah,
one, you know.
yeah,
It's not Wright or Baldwin, right? It's
yeah,
not
yeah,
Hurston or Wright. You
yeah,
know, it's not Du Bois or Booker T. You know, these things are happening in dialogue, right? In the same way that civil rights and Black Power are a Venn diagram with a lot of overlaps. Not like there's some minute that you hand over all ideas to, so it is really about like the Black feminist tenet of both and.
Yeah.
No. And when Morrison says if the market would there could be five Toni Morrisons if the market would bear it. I mean, and certainly Morrison thought that Bambara and Gail Jones were her aesthetic equals. I think
Mhm.
it's important to mark that. Yeah.
Right, which is why she's also really happy to like do any sort of press for any work that she's editing, but not necessarily for like her own self work, right? Like we all these things that you've highlighted, we see. And I also just think really quickly, it's a great contrast to how we understand exceptionalism. Exceptionalism isn't necessarily like how good you are at the thing, but like how capable are you of opening the doors and helping bringing other people who
Right.
are good and who are
Right.
in it too, right? Like that's what makes it powerful.
I mean,
And
look, whiteness adapts, whiteness will
every time,
use any exception as an alibi.
every
You
time,
you
every time.
know.
Yeah,
So yeah, a lot of this is about not letting whiteness adapt.
yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, because they've been so patient, Darlene, and then of course Ron.
Okay. First, I just want to say your teaching practice seems to be quite engaging. And I'm curious to know whether or not you were ever intimidated as a white woman to take on this incredible endeavor.
Mm. Um, I don't know that I would not say intimidated. I do say to my students, this is not about um, being down. This is about rigor. And that works differently in different spaces. So, for example, when I was teaching at Rutgers, Black students would try to sometimes establish a kind of insider dynamic with me, like, well, we already know, or we read Langston Hughes, I read Langston Hughes at home, so we have a kind of inner circle, and that's not good for anyone, right? We're all on one team in one learning community in a classroom, which is really different um, than when I came to the University of Oregon, where classrooms are more predominantly white. I would say every classroom I ever walk into, 9 times out of 10, there's a moment of surprise when they see that I'm a white woman. Um, and I've been doing that for 20 plus years, and so that's okay. Um, and, you know, I think it is important to model for students that you can exercise learning and study and expertise in any area. And I mean that to say that that's not just about like encouraging non-Black people to study African American literature and culture, but that's also about empowering Black students to study Slavic literature or Irish literature or whatever the thing is that works for them. I also wish that we had more than the beyond shameful 2% of tenured Black faculty members in the professoriate in the United States. Um, and one of the things that meant for me out here was that at least in the first 5 or 6 years that I was on this campus, bringing as many Black people with PhDs to campus to show the diversity of thought, right? Like African American literary study is not all just what Courtney Thorsson thinks. Like there's a lot of things, and it's also important to bring Black scholars, to campus as models for our Black students in particular. So, there's different kinds of responsibilities depending on where I am. I mean, I also was very lucky at both my undergraduate and graduate institution to have um, mentors deeply invested in the field of African American literary studies. I see Sonia posted Farrah Griffin's Read Until You Understand. If you have read that book, Farrah Griffin is the person who taught me how to be in the classroom and in this profession. Um, so there are all kinds of reasons to be intimidated, but I do also think that I have a particular kind of set of opportunities and responsibilities as a white woman that I was ready to take on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Ron.
Um, I was wondering if there was any sort of thought or desire to write this more as a popular uh, work of nonfiction as opposed to grounding it in scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe you could have, I don't know if it would have been if it would have taken shorter to get it published.
Mm-hmm.
But and one of the challenges we had, I think, is as a book of scholarship, a lot of bookstores didn't have it, and we really had to scramble to find the book. But this has been our most popular book, So even though we had to beg, borrow, and steal to find it, it's by far we've been doing this now for 7 years, and this has been our most popular book.
That's amazing. And I'm sorry it's hard to find. And yeah, I hate that. So just to be totally real about it, when I was writing and researching this book, I did speak with editors at trade presses as well, and administrators at my institution told me that if I chose to go with a trade press, that the book would not count for
Mhm.
my performance review and potential
Mhm.
promotion. Yes. I mean, and I bet there's some people in here who know what that's like. And I had already gone down the path, because universities will say, well, we want to do public humanities or we want to reach out. And so I had already even pursued that path or sort of had those conversations. But it was not viable for me professionally. And that's what I mean when I say like some of the feelings I had while writing this book were inspiration. I mean, who can believe that Nellie McKay was told an interview with Toni Morrison in 1983 didn't count as something for her scholarly record, so she couldn't put that in her performance review for her job, right? So at least like I can look, so some of the anecdotes in this book, help me buoy me up. In those moments. And I'm just really grateful to readers like you who are scrambling to get copies and to read it, even as it being a work from University Press, which university presses are not for profit, can make it harder to get a hold of and mean it's not marketed in the same kind of way as a trade book would be. Um, and also, I am a scholar, so I write for anybody who finds my work useful. I try to be precise and clear, and I am also really invested in writing durational work, not hot takes. And so there are some ways that a scholarly book or an academic press can be good for durational work. In other words, 10 years from now, if somebody is thinking about literary history, I hope that my book will be useful to them thinking back over time. Um, yeah.
Thank you. I really
Yeah,
I'm
appreciate
thank
blown
you.
away that this has been your most
Thank you.
popular book. Thank you. Right?
Yeah,
I'm blown away.
Yeah.
thank you for that answer, though.
Yep, absolutely. I see there's also just this personal commitment, so that's amazing to know, and it really does help inform how we read the book. Are there any other questions? Any other comments? Maybe you just have a comment. Maybe you just want to chat. Diomene.
I do have a comment. This was so informative. I'm reading the book, and as someone, I'm a teaching artist, so I have been thinking about how to use and exploring how to use arts engagement and researching how it can positively affect your health, especially in underserved communities. And one of the things that come up when I talk about this is people basically wanting to understand where I'm coming from, because there's the researcher space, which, as you know, is full of like academics and people wanting, like, the more credibility you have has to do with like the amount of years that you spent in school and publishing papers, versus like the artist space where it's like, how many residencies have you had and how many like accolades have you acquired. And then it's like that lived experience of actually being in these underserved communities and deriving those benefits. Just reading this book, I just was able to pull so many like connections into how I feel like navigating this space. And while it's not writing, it's very relevant for more things than it outwardly and explicitly says.
I'm muted. Yeah. Courtney, I don't know if you want to respond or anything, but like, thank you so much for your,
Thank you. And maybe throw in the chat where we can see your work, teaching artist.
yeah, awesome. Sonia.
Yes, I'm just curious to know, Dr. Thorson. It's hard to find time to, when you're teaching, to engage in personal reading, but I'm wondering if there's any books that you may consider reading once the semester ends, or possibly some books that you read previously that, you think is worth, mentioning. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I will say since I am teaching a course on Black women short stories in the winter and term, and that's a pretty new course. Um, I'm I am reading for that. Um, because like probably some of y'all, I'm that kind of teacher who is always revising, even when maybe I should just use my old stuff instead of bog myself down in new reading. So I want to say I highly recommend. I just finished the collection of Diane Oliver's short stories, Neighbors. It's edited with an introduction by Tayari Jones. People had told me, oh, Diane Oliver, who was this incredible short story writer who passed tragically young for years. And I finally got around to, since Tayari Jones brought this volume out and wrote. So Diane Oliver's collection, Neighbors. But other short stories. So I always teach when I do a short stories class, works by Nafisa Thompson Spires and Danielle Evans. I think we are in a kind of renaissance for Black women's short stories in the 21st century, and I'm trying to understand what that's about. So right now, I'm reading Dana Johnson's In the Not Quite Dark. Um, that's interesting for me because it's Los Angeles based. So that's a little bit different than a lot of other work I teach. Next in my lineup, and this is both for fun and preparing for my teaching training school for Negro girls by Camille Acker. Yeah, all right, guys, I see that look I see tells me good choice. And then I'm also looking at Tananarive Dew's The Wishing Pool. So I have in my short story class, I have some sci-fi, a couple selections by Octavia Butler, but I'm looking to get some horror in there as well, to remind students that Black women write across genres and do all kinds of things. So I'm just like digging deep in short stories, Sonia, over the holidays, and then um, there's the stack is calling to me over there in the corner. There's, of course, the huge to read stack. But for now, just dwelling with those short stories. Yeah. Yes, Disha absolutely. Absolutely. It's about whether it's one or two or three of her stories that make the syllabus. So thanks for that. Yeah.
Thank you for those recommendations, Courtney. For those of y'all who have access to the chat, make sure that you're looking through it so that you're able to copy and paste whatever sort of resources or book titles are being shared. A gentle reminder that when the meeting is finished, we won't be able to get back to these links, right? Miss Joan,
Yes.
hello.
My question is, when you start writing your book, do you write it out longhand or use a computer, typewriter? How do you start?
Um, so I use a computer to maintain a working outline of some kind of arc of the whole thing. And that's an outline that will go as I revise. But I start by doing a lot of reading. And so when I'm reading, what I do is stick post-it notes and make my notes about ideas that are occurring to me, or, maybe there's a poem I want to highlight. So anytime I read a book, there's just a bunch of post-it notes with my notes on them in the side. And then I'll sit down at the computer and kind of turn that into ideas and sentences. The Sisterhood book, this was different because I used those methods, but I wrote it all in one long document that I just kept working on and then checking back against my outline and editing the outline to reflect what I was doing in the big long document, or use the outline to figure out what I needed to move around. And that was really different for me, but it needed to be one long document that I worked at on the computer, because partly to keep track of all the archival material I was drawing and quoting from properly, and partly because it's one story. Like, I think about this book as moving outward in concentric circles from the kind of lead up to, and there's that late 70s period, and then it grows beyond the sisterhood and beyond New York and sort of to the present. So there's also, I also often might take notes in a spatial map kind of way. Um, my handwritten notes are like timelines and family trees from a novel, and or like character maps or other kinds of things. And I have those too for books that I read. So it's something like that. And then when it gets further down the road, I would just tape the outline and then eventually just the table of contents up on the wall in front of me so that I know where I am in the story that I'm trying to tell. Did that get it? Does that make sense? It's a mixed method.
Yes, I understand.
Thank
But
you.
you have so much information, especially in the introduction, and well, so much information, period,
Yeah.
that I was wondering, did you write this out, or are you on a computer or what? But
Yeah.
yeah, I understand. Thank
I
you.
mean, and I keep, really detailed, separate hard copy folders for archival materials so that I will know for sure where I saw something. Do I have permission to quote from it? When did I look at it? Was this at Emory, or, was this? So those things stay in hard copy. So for every member of the sisterhood, there's like there are folders of archival material.
That's so cool. Yeah. Tasha, what up?
Hey, 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 what it do? Hello
Hmm.
there, Dr. Courtney.
Hi.
Want to say thank you for the invitation to delve into my own archive. And so we were together in person, and in just reading this book, my curiosity peaked around how many of these women are in my personal library, and it became a quest now. So every time I get introduced to it, I'm like, wait, I think I have this person. So literally, I went to group on Saturday, and it's still building, Ron. I have Audre Lorde, I got Sula, we had Gail Jones,
Yes.
we have June Jordan. I mean, the stack
Yes.
is big. And then even the Black women's
Yes.
writers anthology. And so I'm finding that they were already in my space already, and
Mm.
that your book really is an invitation to do the deep dive. And so just remembering and recalling that we have our own archives readily available to us. And so yeah. Oh,
Love it.
I
That's
love
great.
your deep
That was
dive,
great.
Ron. And it's still growing. So thank you for the work that you're doing. It actually makes me think of, I don't know if you're familiar with Black Marxism
Hmm.
by
You said
Dr.
it
Roxy
Robinson,
Martin.
you mean? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And so this book almost feels like that, as well as you're offering breadcrumbs to lead us back to some of our most profound and prolific readers. And so thank you for that.
That's a big, heavy compliment. I thank you for that.
Because it's the same thing. It's like one of those books that you can't readily get access to.
Yeah.
And I just remembered in the conversation that I was having, I was taking the class through the Brooklyn Institute for Social Research.
Hmm.
And that was one of the things that we were talking about, and that how this book has kind of been on the other side of access. And so
Mm.
trying to find it and pull it up from like the bookstore, that we had to like go online to like
Mhm.
search for it, and not many people knowing about it. So really it's just like the breadcrumbs all together condensed to make it
Mhm.
easier to find people that reflect our lived experiences. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Layla.
I was just gonna say, like, I love the part in the book where you talked about that there was hard to get access to certain books and how copies of the books, certain books, was being made at that time. How easier are some of those books that these famous individuals, the Sisterhood, whether they were a part of that? How hard is it still to get some of these books? I wanted to ask, and if in their publications, is that something that, as an academic, that's something that people want to pursue to kind of put them back into publications?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think the recovery and publication of work by Black writers is a fundamental practice of Black studies, Black literary studies. Um, I I must mention here that Deborah McDowell published a series with Beacon Press that brought back into print works by Gail Jones, Alice Childress, Gwendolyn Brooks's novel Maud Martha, among other works in the 80s. It sometimes seems to me that that kind of labor of reintroduction actually has to be done generation after generation. Um, so, I mean, when I tell you I'm a scholar of contemporary Black women writers, and I just read these Diane Oliver short stories for the first time because there was a collection of them that came out, right? So that work of recovery is part of the scholarly project, but it's also part of the project of readers at, bookstores, book clubs, right? Word of mouth. I mean, demonstrating demand. Um, Stuff goes out of print and then you have to demand it. So, like, if you like a book, ask your local library to buy copies of it, write reviews of it online. All those short stories are a lot harder to get publicity for than novels. So all those short story writers we're talking about in the chat in this conversation, review those books online. If you like them, ask your local library to buy a copy. Um, the the pass when I talk about like the in this book where I write about passing around what were then mimeographed copies of Their Eyes Were Watching God, for example, um, that's a success story where we understand Hurston's 1937 novel Their Eyes to be really part of American literary culture writ large. It's still taught in lots of classrooms. Like that's an example of a success story. I think that um, there are as many other success stories out there waiting to happen. Um, yeah, so I don't know. I think that that's an ongoing project. Like for me, teaching those works or teaching like short stories by Jamie Hatley that have not been collected in a volume, but were published in Callaloo, which is a journal, so few people will access it. Like introducing students to Hatley's fiction is a way to create audience and appetite. I mean, so like the teaching is really kind of my lane, or the assigning or the having syllabi that name those books on them. That's really where I operate, but I think recovery is just an ongoing project. And we still actually have to recover and keep alive and in print stuff that's really contemporary, right? I mean, one of the stories I'm telling in my book is about how Paul Marshall is seeing her 1959 novel, Brown Girl, Brownstones, go out of print as she's a member of the Sisterhood in the same period that they're trying to recover Black women's novels from just 30 years before, right? And as I think it was Sonia mentioned, Toni Cade Bambara's short stories, the two volumes, Gorilla My Love and The Seabirds Are Still Alive, are not nearly as readily available as they should be. Um, I even, Bambara's 1980 novel, The Salt Eaters, I taught it this term, and some students even had trouble getting a hold of a copy of The Salt Eaters, which I consider to be the novel that is most foundational to my intellectual formation and a must read if you think about Black women writers. So, yeah, so the work continues as far as that goes. That's not a very satisfying answer, but that's some of what's there.
Thank you. Thank you very
Yeah.
No, of
much.
course. And we appreciate the insight into like what you're also working toward. Wow, somehow, some way, happens every week. It is already 8:21. 9 minutes on the clock. Before I call in any more questions and any more comments, I also just want to key folks back into the chat. Make sure you're reading through what our other members are sharing in terms of other works. Um, and a reminder that next week is our final session with this book. Please read pages 172 all the way to the end. I've just popped that into our chat, but you could also always go to onebookonebronx.com. And Tasha, yeah, take it away.
So in the book, when you're talking about to move the needle in Black women's lives, there is a passage where Jones is writing to who did she write to? She wrote a letter and she says, a problem for all Black organizations, frankly, is that they're always placed in a, it's on page 81 for anyone who has the book. Um, a problem for all Black organizations, frankly, is that we're always placed in a situation politically and culturally and socially where the assumption is that you're supposed to somehow do something, be active in some way. And I think it's only in the last maybe 2 to 3 decades that Black people have enough kind of sensibility to come together to just hang. I bring that up because are there any examples of the sisterhood just hanging? Because I know you mentioned in the book where they were support systems for each other. And I love how you were specific enough to share that some of those personal details around the depression, all of things were kept off of the record. But were there moments in time with the sisterhood where they were just like hanging, like not at a conference, not at whatever, not at the meetings, but just like just being their full selves?
Yes. So it's um the relationships between and among sisterhood members varied widely, right? So Bambara and Morrison were very close friends. Margot Jefferson and Michelle Wallace were and are very close friends. So they're also like these kind of side just hanging. But when I when I say in the book there were things that they explicitly did not include in meeting minutes, perhaps so that scholars like me would not comb over them 30, 40 years later. I mean, those things included Alice Walker taking the group on a walk through Prospect Park. She tells everybody after the next meeting, we're going on a walk in Prospect Park, so wear appropriate shoes. Um, the one member of the sisterhood who is now goes by Dr. Ananda Sananda, who's a transcendental meditation practitioner and teacher, led the group in meditation practices. I also think that you can tell, and I will say, I mean, one thing about this book is I'm interested in these women as the work they did to transform culture and public spheres. So, like, this isn't a book about who dated whom. There's not a lot of the like sort of like a lot of personal behind the scenes stuff because that's not really the work that I'm here to do. Um, but to say the very fact that every sisterhood meeting was on a Sunday afternoon, noon into evening, and that every meeting was potluck, broadly defined, tells you that they did just hang. And what potluck meant might mean that you were bringing food, or it might mean you were bringing a record that you wanted to play for the group, or a poem you were going to read, or some photographs. Paul Marshall shared her photographs from Festac in Lagos, 77. She did a slideshow. Other group members did photograph slideshows of travel to Cuba. So that I think is an element of just hanging that was happening in the context of those meetings, and that kind of social, cultural, culinary potluck fostered that. And there were, I think, a couple of meetings that were really more of an end of year party around this time of year. One year on 2 days, so the anniversary is in 2 days. They rented a room at the Biltmore Hotel to throw a December party. Um, and so that was there. That was there too. Um, and some things are allowed to be kept private.
Thank you so much for that insight, Courtney. An amazing, great question, Tasha, for us to really, really get into and engage. Um, wow, what? 8:27. Say it ain't so. Any other questions? Any other comments? Now is your time. Don't be shy. I don't want next
I
week to
have a
come.
question.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna come to you right now. I don't want next week to come and y'all are like, oh, I wish I would have said this. So I wonder how she felt about that because now is the time. Folake, show us how it's done. Please take it away.
Yes, thanks for that introduction, Paula. But my question for Courtney, especially someone who's like a professor, a PhD holder as well, how are you like perfecting like your writing? Not perfecting, but how are you like, fine tuning your craft right now? And like who's checking like your work? Like who's your like book club, to know that like you're on the money, like you're heading in the right direction with things.
So I want to, related to who is my community, I want to second the recommendation in the chat of Dana Williams' book, Toni at Random, if you're interested in literary history and Toni Morrison. So because I teach, I'm
Can you
constantly
repeat the
reading.
book again? Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's Dana Williams, and the book is Toni at Random, and it's about Toni Morrison's work as an editor at Random House. Yeah, and I get the who is in my sisterhood. I will say a couple of things just in terms of honing craft because I teach young students who are writing, and I'm constantly telling them, avoid passive voice, or this syntax doesn't make any sense, or whatever. I mean, grading other people's writing is a good way to get better at writing on your own. And then I will say, yes, I have um, been so lucky to have other trusted scholars of African American literature whom I can swap work with, offer comment, give one another feedback. I will say, in particular, um, that as I was writing this book, Erica Edwards and I, and I recommend Erica Edwards's work, scholar, writer, friend, intellectual. We swapped full manuscripts, so that was one person. But I have had the opportunity to talk through portions of this work in all kinds of settings. Like that's why conferences maybe matter and can be useful. And I've gotten to be on panels where I shared like bits and pieces of this work and get feedback. And some of the really key people for me there um, were like Mecca Jamila Sullivan, Kevin Quashie. Those are Margot Crawford, Evie Shockley. I mean, those are people that I know I can go to with work when I want to know if I'm on the right track. And I also want to say very frankly that everywhere else I've studied and worked before where I am now, I had a robust uh, community of Black scholars of African American literature. And so I need to maintain that remotely, and that's why something like that Phyllis Wheatley Poetry Festival was so important. Or I was able to go to Furious Flower, the poetry conference at JMU, the most recent one. Those kind of communities are helpful and important. So that is some of it. And my best friend is an American Studies scholar, so I'll shout out also. Matt Sandler has read everything I've ever written. His first book is The Black Romantics, and it's about 19th century Black American poetry. And he is also a white scholar of African American literature and culture. So, we mix it up. I'm lucky to have that network of folks. Um, and also along the way of this book, a lot of senior Black women scholars answered the phone when I gave a call to say, well, what am I supposed to say to an editor? How should I pitch this book? And some of the people who most have to get shouted out there are Mary Helen Washington and Gabrielle Foreman. Trisha Matthew has been a huge support. She works in an earlier period than I do, but the great Trisha Matthew has been a huge support in this book. So yeah, I have been lucky. And a lot of what I learned from that is ask. Like we're in this enterprise of studying and teaching and writing about African American literature together, and we want to encourage each other, right? So ask for help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your insight and your time discussing with us today, Courtney. We are so stoked and grateful. It is 8:32, but just want to make sure if anyone has any lingering questions or comments, feel free to take up this time. If not, I am so grateful for all of you. Thank you for joining our sessions thus far.